Marcus Wellington had everything money could buy. His penthouse office sat on the 47th floor of the Wellington Tower in downtown Manhattan, overlooking Central Park, like a king surveying his kingdom. At 52 years old, he had built an empire from tech investments that made him one of the youngest billionaires in America. His tailored suits cost more than most people earned in a month, and his watch collection could fund a small hospital. Every morning at exactly 6:30, Marcus arrived at his building. He would stride through the marble lobby without glancing at the people who made his empire run smoothly. The security guards, the maintenance crew, the cleaning staff were all invisible to him. They were simply part of the machinery that kept his world spinning. Rose Martinez had worked as a janitor in the Wellington Tower for 12 years. She started her shift at 5 in the morning, long before the executives arrived with their expensive coffee and important phone calls. At 63 years old, Rose had cleaned more offices than she could count. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing floors and polishing windows. She wore the same navy blue uniform every day and carried her supplies in a gray cart that squeaked when she pushed it down the hallways. Rose had emigrated from the Philippines 30 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. She raised 3 children on a janitor's salary, working 2 jobs for most of their childhood. Her husband had passed away 10 years ago, leaving her to face retirement alone. But Rose had a secret that nobody in the building suspected. Behind her quiet smile and humble demeanor was a mind that understood numbers better than most Wall Street analysts. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Marcus stepped out of his private elevator, barking orders into his phone about a merger deal. Rose was cleaning the glass doors of the conference room nearby, making herself small and invisible as she always did when the important people passed by. Marcus ended his call and noticed his reflection in the glass Rose was polishing. He saw her wrinkled hands moving in small circles, her shoulders bent from years of hard labor. Something about the scene irritated him. Maybe it was the stock market dip from the previous day, or maybe it was the argument he had with his ex-wife about their daughter's trust fund. Whatever the reason, Marcus felt the need to assert his superiority. He walked over to where Rose was working and cleared his throat loudly. Rose turned around, her dark eyes meeting his for the first time in 12 years. She smiled politely, the way service workers smile at people who never see them as human. Marcus noticed Rose was listening to something through a small earbud. Business news was playing softly, discussing the Federal Reserve's latest interest rate decision. This amused him. A janitor listening to financial news seemed as absurd as a fish trying to climb a tree. The conference room behind them had whiteboards covered with investment strategies and market predictions. Marcus had just finished a meeting with his top analysts, men and women with Harvard and Yale degrees who commanded 6-figure salaries. They had been discussing whether to invest in renewable energy stocks or stick with traditional tech companies. Marcus decided to have some fun at Rose's expense. He was not a cruel man by nature, but success had made him arrogant. He had forgotten what it felt like to struggle, to worry about bills, to count pennies at the grocery store. He pointed to the earbud in Rose's ear with a smirk. The question he asked was dripping with condescension, spoken loud enough for his assistant and 2 junior executives to hear. He wanted them to laugh with him, to share in the joke of a cleaning woman pretending to understand the complex world of finance. Rose pulled out her earbud slowly. She had heard that tone before, from dozens of wealthy men who thought their money made them smarter than everyone else. She could have walked away. She could have apologized and continued cleaning. That was what she had done for 12 years. But something in Marcus's expression pushed her past her usual patience. Maybe it was exhaustion from working 2 jobs for so many years. Maybe it was frustration at being invisible for over a decade. Maybe it was the memory of her late husband telling her to never let anyone make her feel small. Rose straightened her back and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. She spoke in clear, unaccented English, her voice steady and calm. She told him she was listening to analysis about emerging markets in Southeast Asia. Then she said something that made Marcus's smirk falter. She mentioned a specific semiconductor company that was about to announce a breakthrough in chip manufacturing. She explained why the renewable energy sector was overvalued and suggested that artificial intelligence infrastructure was the smarter investment for the next quarter. Marcus blinked in surprise. The semiconductor company Rose mentioned was one his analyst had briefly discussed but dismissed as too risky. The AI infrastructure play was something only his most senior advisor had suggested in a private memo. His assistant stopped typing on her phone. The two junior executives exchanged confused glances. How did a janitor know about investment strategies that required access to insider research and market analysis? Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment, but pride would not let him back down. He laughed loudly, a forced sound that echoed in the hallway. He made a dismissive gesture with his hand and said something about how everyone thinks they are an expert these days. He suggested that watching financial news did not make someone qualified to give investment advice. His tone implied that Rose should stick to mopping floors and leave the thinking to people like him. Rose did not argue. She did not raise her voice or show anger. She simply nodded politely, put her earbud back in, and returned to cleaning the glass door. But before she turned away, she said one more thing. She told Marcus that if he ever wanted to see what real investing looked like, he should ask to see her portfolio. Then she moved her cart down the hallway, the squeaky wheel announcing her departure. Marcus and his employees stood in awkward silence for a moment before bursting into laughter. The idea of a janitor having an investment portfolio worth examining was hilarious to them. They joked about it as they walked to Marcus's office. One executive suggested Rose probably had a few $100s in a savings account and thought she was Warren Buffett. Another made a crack about checking her portfolio of cleaning supplies. Marcus forgot about the encounter within an hour. He had billion-dollar decisions to make. His day filled with conference calls, contract negotiations, and a lunch meeting with the senator. Rose Martinez and her supposed investment advice disappeared from his mind like smoke in the wind. But Rose did not forget. That evening, as she rode the subway home to her small apartment in Queens, she thought about the encounter. She was not angry at Marcus. She had met too many men like him to waste energy on anger. Instead, she felt something closer to pity. Marcus Wellington had all the money in the world, but had lost something more valuable. He had lost the ability to see people as they truly were. When Rose got home, she made herself a simple dinner of rice and vegetables. She sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she had taught her children to read, where she had paid bills during the hardest years, where she had cried when her husband died. Next to her plate was a tablet computer, a gift from her daughter who worked as a software engineer in California. Rose opened her investment app and looked at her portfolio. The numbers on the screen told a story that would have shocked Marcus Wellington into silence. They told the story of a woman who had taken every spare dollar from her janitor's salary and invested it with the wisdom of someone who truly understood how money worked. They told the story of compound interest, patient decisions, and research done late at night after exhausting shifts. Rose smiled to herself and took a bite of her dinner. Tomorrow she would wake up at 4 in the morning and return to Wellington Tower. She would push her squeaky cart and clean the offices of people who never looked at her twice. And that was perfectly fine with her, because Rose Martinez knew something that Marcus Wellington had yet to learn. True wealth was not about having money. It was about understanding money. And understanding came not from expensive degrees or designer suits, but from discipline, patience, and the humility to keep learning no matter where you started in life. 3 weeks passed after the encounter between Marcus and Rose. The financial markets had become unpredictable during that time. Technology stocks that Marcus had invested heavily in began to stumble. Companies that seemed unstoppable just months ago were suddenly losing value as investors grew nervous about rising interest rates and global economic uncertainty. Marcus sat in his office late one Thursday evening, staring at red numbers on multiple computer screens. His portfolio had lost $40 million in the past 2 weeks. For most people, losing $40 million would be catastrophic. For Marcus, it was merely annoying, but what truly bothered him was that his highly paid analysts had not seen it coming. They had assured him that tech stocks would remain strong through the end of the year. His assistant Jennifer knocked on the door and entered with another stack of reports. She had worked for Marcus for 7 years and knew his moods well enough to tread carefully when the markets turned against him. She placed the reports on his desk and was about to leave when Marcus stopped her with a question. He asked if she remembered the janitor who had been listening to financial news a few weeks ago. The one who claimed to have investment advice. Jennifer remembered immediately. She had thought about that strange encounter several times since it happened. There was something about the cleaning woman's confidence that had stuck in her memory. Marcus told Jennifer to find out the janitor's name and see if she was working tonight. Jennifer looked puzzled but did as she was told. She returned 15 minutes later with information. The janitor's name was Rose Martinez. She worked the early morning shift but sometimes came in for evening overtime when the building needed deep cleaning. Tonight happened to be one of those nights. She was currently working on the 32nd floor. Marcus stood up and grabbed his suit jacket. Jennifer asked if he wanted her to call Rose to his office. Marcus shook his head. Something made him want to approach this differently. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the nagging feeling that he had dismissed someone too quickly based on appearances. He took the elevator down to the 32nd floor. The offices there were mostly empty, with only a few workaholics still at their computers. Marcus found Rose in a corner office, emptying trash bins and wiping down desks. She wore the same navy blue uniform and moved with the same quiet efficiency he had seen before. Marcus stood in the doorway watching her work for a moment before speaking. When he cleared his throat, Rose looked up without surprise as if she had been expecting him. Her expression was neutral, neither friendly nor hostile. She asked politely if she could help him with something. Marcus felt awkward, which was unusual for him. He was a man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But something about this 63-year-old janitor made him feel off balance. He asked if she remembered their conversation from a few weeks ago. Rose said she did. Marcus decided to be direct. He admitted that the markets had been rough lately and that some of his investments were not performing as expected. He said this casually, as if discussing the weather, not wanting to appear vulnerable. Then he said something that surprised both of them. He asked Rose if her offer to show him her portfolio had been serious. Rose stopped working and studied Marcus carefully. She had dealt with wealthy people long enough to recognize genuine curiosity from mockery. She saw something different in Marcus's eyes now. The arrogance was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Uncertainty, perhaps. Or maybe just the smallest crack in his confidence. She asked Marcus why he wanted to see her portfolio. Was he going to mock her again? Make jokes with his employees about the poor janitor pretending to be an investor? Marcus had the decency to look embarrassed. He said no. He told her that the semiconductor company she had mentioned 3 weeks ago had indeed announced a breakthrough just as she predicted. Their stock had jumped 30% in 10 days. He wanted to know how a janitor knew that when his six-figure analysts had missed it. Rose smiled slightly. She told Marcus that knowledge was not about how much money someone made or where they went to school. It was about paying attention and being willing to learn from anyone. She had been studying the markets for 40 years, ever since she arrived in America with nothing. While other immigrants spent their free time watching television or socializing, Rose had spent hers reading financial newspapers and investment books from the library. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was rare for him. Rose explained that she had learned to research companies thoroughly before investing. She looked at patent filings, manufacturing reports, supply chain data, things that most retail investors never bothered to examine. She had no formal education in finance, but she had something more valuable. She had time and patience. The semiconductor company Marcus mentioned had filed 3 new patents 6 months ago. Rose had read about them in an obscure trade publication. She had researched the technology behind the patents and understood that they would revolutionize chip manufacturing. So she had bought stock in the company when it was cheap, long before the mainstream financial media caught on. Marcus felt a strange mixture of admiration and shame. This woman, whom he had dismissed as insignificant, had outsmarted him and his entire team of experts. He asked Rose directly if she would show him her portfolio, not to mock her, but because he genuinely wanted to understand how she invested. Rose considered the request for a long moment. She could have said no. She could have told Marcus that he had his chance and blown it with his arrogance, but Rose was not a petty person. She believed in helping others when she could, even those who had not earned her kindness. She pulled out her tablet from her work cart. The device looked out of place next to her cleaning supplies and rubber gloves. She unlocked it and opened her investment app, then handed the tablet to Marcus. She told him to look but not to judge. Her portfolio had been built penny by penny, dollar by dollar, over 4 decades of sacrifice and discipline. Marcus took the tablet and looked at the screen. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the information. He stopped scrolling and looked at Rose, then back at the screen, then at Rose again. He asked if this was real. The numbers he was seeing seemed impossible for someone who earned minimum wage. Rose's portfolio was worth just over $2 million. But the value was not what shocked Marcus. It was the composition of the investments and their performance. Rose held positions in 17 different companies across 6 sectors. Her returns over the past 10 years averaged 23% annually, far outperforming the market average and beating most professional fund managers. She owned stock in companies that Marcus had never heard of, small manufacturing firms in Vietnam and Indonesia, agricultural technology companies in Brazil, water purification businesses in Africa. These were not the glamorous tech giants that dominated financial headlines. They were unsexy, practical companies that solved real problems in growing markets. Marcus saw that Rose had bought shares in an Indian pharmaceutical company 5 years ago. That company had just secured a major contract to supply generic medications across Southeast Asia. Her initial investment of $8,000 was now worth $72,000. She had invested in a Kenyan mobile banking platform before mobile money became mainstream in Africa. That investment had grown by 400%. Between her picks were also some familiar names. She owned shares in Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon, but she had bought them decades ago when they were relatively cheap. She had held them through multiple market crashes, never panicking, never selling. The compound growth over time had been extraordinary. Marcus handed the tablet back to Rose with shaking hands. He was a billionaire, but in that moment he felt like a student standing before a master. He asked Rose how she had learned to invest like this. How did a janitor with no formal financial education build a portfolio that outperformed most professionals? Rose sat down on one of the office chairs, something she normally never did while working. She told Marcus her story. When she first arrived in America, she worked 3 jobs. She cleaned offices in the morning, worked in a restaurant kitchen in the afternoon, and babysat children in the evening. She saved every penny she could. After a year, she had $1,000 in savings. A coworker had told her about stocks and how regular people could invest their money. Rose went to the library and borrowed every book she could find about investing. She read books by Benjamin Graham and Peter Lynch. She studied Warren Buffett's annual letters to shareholders. She learned about value investing, about buying good companies at fair prices and holding them for the long term. Rose's first investment was 50 shares of a textile company for $20 total. The company made clothes for export. Rose had researched them thoroughly, reading their financial statements and understanding their business model. Over the next 3 years, that $50 grew to $200. She was hooked. For 40 years, Rose had followed the same strategy. She invested a small amount from every paycheck, never more than she could afford to lose. She researched companies obsessively, reading annual reports late at night after her children went to bed. She looked for businesses with strong fundamentals, honest management, and room to grow. She avoided fads and popular stocks that everyone was buying. She never invested based on tips or rumors. Most importantly, Rose never panicked during market crashes. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, she bought more stock at cheaper prices. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, she saw opportunity instead of disaster. While others were selling in fear, Rose was buying quality companies at bargain prices. Those crisis purchases had generated some of her biggest returns. Marcus listened to Rose's story in silence. He realized that he had been investing completely backwards. He chased hot stocks in trendy sectors. He listened to analysts who were paid to promote certain investments. He made emotional decisions based on fear and greed. He had all the resources in the world, but he lacked the discipline and patience that Rose had cultivated over decades. He asked Rose why she still worked as a janitor if she had $2 million. She could retire comfortably. She could travel, relax, enjoy the fruits of her labor. Rose smiled and explained that she liked working. It gave her purpose and structure. Besides, she was saving most of her janitor's salary now since her children were grown and independent. Every dollar she earned still went into investments. She wanted to leave something substantial for her grandchildren. Marcus felt humbled in a way he had not experienced in years. He asked Rose if she would be willing to meet with him again to discuss investing. He wanted to learn from her. He would pay her consulting fee, whatever she wanted. Rose laughed at that suggestion. She did not want his money for advice, but she said she would be happy to talk with him sometimes, as long as he treated her with respect. Marcus agreed immediately. They exchanged phone numbers, something that would have seemed absurd to Marcus just an hour earlier. A billionaire and a janitor becoming financial advisors to each other. But Marcus was beginning to understand that titles and salaries meant nothing when it came to real knowledge. As Rose packed up her cleaning cart and prepared to move to the next office, Marcus asked her one final question. What was her advice for him right now? Given the current market conditions, Rose thought for a moment before answering. She told him to stop trying to get rich quickly. He was already rich. Instead, he should focus on not losing money through stupid decisions. She suggested he look at boring, stable companies that people actually needed. Infrastructure, utilities, healthcare. Not the flashy tech companies that everyone was talking about. Marcus thanked Rose and watched her push her squeaky cart down the hallway. He stood alone in the empty office, looking at the city lights through the window. For the first time in his career, Marcus Wellington felt like he had something valuable to learn. And the teacher had been right in front of him all along, invisible behind a janitor's uniform. Marcus Wellington did something he had not done in 15 years. He cleared his Saturday morning schedule and invited Rose Martinez to have coffee at a quiet diner in Queens near her apartment. Rose had suggested the location. She said if Marcus wanted to learn from her, he should see how regular people lived. The diner was nothing like the expensive restaurants Marcus usually frequented. The booths had cracked vinyl seats and the coffee came in thick ceramic mugs that had been washed thousands of times. Marcus arrived in casual clothes, having left his driver at home and taken the subway for the first time in a decade. He felt conspicuous and out of place, but also strangely liberated. Nobody in the diner knew who he was. Nobody cared about his net worth or his business empire. He was just another customer waiting for his coffee. Rose arrived exactly on time, wearing jeans and a simple sweater. Without her janitor uniform, she looked different. More relaxed, more confident. She slid into the booth across from Marcus and ordered coffee and toast. Marcus ordered the same, not because he wanted it, but because he was trying to fit into her world. They spent the first few minutes in small talk. Rose asked about Marcus's daughter, having overheard him mention her during phone calls at the office. Marcus was surprised Rose had noticed such details. He talked about his daughter Emily, who was 19 and studying art history at college. He admitted they were not close. He had been too busy building his empire to be a present father. Now Emily barely spoke to him except when she needed money. Rose listened without judgment. She told Marcus about her own 3 children. Her oldest son was a teacher in California. Her daughter was a software engineer. Her youngest son ran a small construction business in Texas. They called her every week and visited during holidays. Rose had sacrificed everything to give them opportunities, but she had never sacrificed time with them. Even when she worked 3 jobs, she always made dinner and helped with homework. Marcus felt a pang of regret as he listened. He had given his daughter every material advantage, but had failed to give her his time and attention. Money, he was learning, could not buy back lost years or repair damaged relationships. Rose steered the conversation toward investing. She asked Marcus about his current portfolio. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her his holdings. Rose studied the list carefully, asking questions about why he had chosen each investment. Marcus realized he did not have good answers for most of them. He had bought many stocks because his analysts recommended them, or because they were trending in financial media, or simply because everyone else was buying them. Rose shook her head slowly. She told Marcus he was investing like a gambler, not like a business person. He was betting on prices going up without understanding the actual businesses behind the stocks. She asked him a simple question. If the stock market closed tomorrow and did not reopen for 5 years, would he be happy owning these companies? Marcus had no answer. Rose explained her philosophy. She only invested in businesses she understood and believed in. She looked for companies that solved real problems for real people. She avoided complex financial instruments and anything that seemed too good to be true. She never invested borrowed money and never invested more than she could afford to lose completely. Marcus pulled out a notebook and started taking notes, something his assistant normally did for him. Rose talked about the importance of reading financial statements. She showed Marcus how to analyze a company's balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow. These were basic concepts that Marcus theoretically knew, but Rose explained them in practical terms that made everything clearer. She used the diner as an example. If Marcus were considering investing in this diner, what would he look at? He would check if they had more customers than empty tables. He would see if people ordered expensive items or just coffee. He would notice if the equipment was old and needed replacing soon. He would ask how much the rent was and if the location had good foot traffic. These were simple observations, but they told the story of whether the business was healthy or struggling. Rose applied the same logic to every company she invested in. She researched their products, their competition, their management team. She read customer reviews and industry reports. She looked at their debt levels and their ability to generate cash. She avoided companies that relied on hype or promises about future technology. She preferred boring, profitable businesses that had been around for decades. Marcus asked about Rose's most successful investment. Rose smiled and told him about a waste management company she had invested in 25 years ago. It was not glamorous. The company collected garbage and recycled materials. But Rose had understood that as long as humans existed, they would create trash that needed to be handled. The company had steady revenue, reasonable debt, and honest management. She bought shares when they were cheap because nobody was excited about garbage collection. Over 25 years, that investment had grown by over 3,000%. The company paid regular dividends that Rose had reinvested to buy more shares. It had survived multiple recessions because people always needed trash collection, even during economic downturns. That single investment now represented almost 15% of her total portfolio value. Marcus was fascinated. His own investments were mostly in exciting tech companies with big promises and flashy presentations. But many of them had crashed or disappointed. The boring, stable companies he had ignored might have served him better. Rose nodded in agreement. Excitement was the enemy of good investing, she said. The best investments were often boring ones that made steady money year after year. They talked for 2 hours, long after their coffee had gone cold. Rose shared more stories about her investment journey. She talked about mistakes she had made early on. She had once invested in a mining company because someone told her it was going to strike gold. She lost her entire investment when the company went bankrupt. That lesson taught her to never invest based on rumors or tips from others. She had also learned the hard way about diversification. Early in her investing career, she had put too much money into a single company that seemed perfect. When that company faced unexpected problems, Rose lost almost 30% of her portfolio in 1 month. After that, she made sure to spread her investments across different companies and industries. If one failed, it would not destroy everything she had built. Marcus asked Rose about her research process. How did she find these hidden gem companies that nobody else noticed? Rose explained that she read constantly. She subscribed to trade publications for different industries. She read annual reports from companies around the world. She followed business news from emerging markets that most American investors ignored. Rose had a particular interest in developing countries. She explained that wealthy investors like Marcus focused on companies in America and Europe because they were familiar and safe. But the real growth was happening in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Billions of people in those regions were entering the middle class for the first time. They needed banks, healthcare, infrastructure, consumer goods. The companies serving those markets had enormous growth potential. Marcus admitted that he knew almost nothing about markets in developing countries. They seemed risky and unstable to him. Rose challenged that assumption. She said risk came from ignorance, not from geography. If Marcus took time to understand those markets, he would see opportunities that others missed. She had made some of her best returns from companies in places like India, Vietnam, and Nigeria. The conversation shifted to Marcus's business empire. Rose asked him what his companies actually did. Marcus explained his tech investments, his venture capital funds, his real estate holdings. As he talked, Rose asked probing questions that made Marcus uncomfortable. Did his companies create real value for customers, or were they just moving money around? Were his tech startups solving actual problems, or were they chasing trends? Marcus realized he could not answer some of her questions satisfactorily. Many of his investments were based on financial engineering, rather than real value creation. He owned companies that made money by being clever with tax structures, or by disrupting industries in ways that benefited investors, but not necessarily customers or workers. Rose's simple questions exposed the hollowness of some of his business philosophy. Rose told Marcus about a conversation she once had with her late husband. He had asked her why she worked so hard to save and invest when they had so little money. Rose had explained that she wanted to build something that would outlast her. She wanted her children and grandchildren to have opportunities she never had. Her husband had understood and supported her, even when it meant they could not afford luxuries that other families enjoyed. That long-term thinking had guided all of Rose's investment decisions. She never chased quick profits or tried to time the market. She thought in decades, not days or months. She had held some of her investments for over 30 years, watching them grow slowly but steadily. Compound interest had worked its magic, turning small amounts into substantial wealth. Marcus felt something shift inside him as he listened to Rose. He had been thinking about investing all wrong. He had treated it like a game where the goal was to make as much money as possible, as quickly as possible. Rose treated investing like planting a garden. You prepared the soil carefully, planted good seeds, watered patiently, and trusted that time and nature would bring growth. You did not dig up the plants every week to check if they were growing fast enough. As they prepared to leave the diner, Marcus asked Rose if she would be willing to meet regularly to discuss investing. He offered to pay her a consulting fee of $10,000 per month. Rose looked at him with amusement. She told him she did not want his money. What would she do with more money anyway? She already had more than she needed. But she would meet with him if he agreed to one condition. Marcus asked what the condition was. Rose told him that for every hour they spent together, Marcus had to spend an equal hour doing something meaningful for someone who could not benefit him financially. He could volunteer at a soup kitchen, tutor underprivileged kids, visit elderly people in nursing homes, anything that involved helping others without expecting anything in return. Rose believed that real wisdom came not just from making money, but from understanding the lives of people who struggled. Marcus agreed to Rose's condition without hesitation. He had not felt this energized about anything in years. Learning from Rose was teaching him more than investment strategy. It was teaching him about patience, discipline, and what really mattered in life. They left the diner together, the billionaire and the janitor, two people from completely different worlds who had found unexpected common ground. Marcus drove Rose home in his car, which he had picked up from where he parked it. They made plans to meet again the following Saturday. As Rose got out of the car in front of her modest apartment building, she turned back to Marcus with a smile. She told him that he had potential to become a good investor, but first he needed to become a better person. True wealth was not measured in dollars, but in relationships, knowledge, and the positive impact one had on others. Marcus nodded, feeling like a student who had just received wisdom from a master teacher. He drove home thinking about everything Rose had shared, realizing his education had only just begun. The next 3 months transformed Marcus Wellington in ways he never expected. True to his promise to Rose, he spent every Saturday morning with her, learning about investing and life. And true to her condition, he spent every Saturday afternoon volunteering at a food bank in Brooklyn. The experience humbled him in ways that losing money in the stock market never could. At the food bank, Marcus met people who reminded him of Rose. They were hard-working individuals who had fallen on difficult times through no fault of their own. Single mothers working 2 jobs who still could not afford rent. Elderly people choosing between medication and food. Veterans struggling with disabilities and unemployment. These were not lazy people looking for handouts. They were human beings fighting to survive in a system that often seemed designed to keep them down. Marcus began to see the world differently. When his analysts presented investment opportunities, he started asking new questions. How would this business affect ordinary workers? Would it create good jobs or eliminate them? Did the company treat its employees fairly? These were questions he had never considered important before. Profit had been his only measure of success. Rose noticed the change in Marcus during their Saturday meetings. He was listening more and talking less. He was asking thoughtful questions instead of trying to impress her with his knowledge. He had started reading the books she recommended, including biographies of successful investors who had built wealth slowly and ethically. Marcus was becoming a student in the truest sense. One Saturday morning, Rose brought Marcus to meet her investment club. Marcus was surprised to learn that Rose was part of a group of working-class investors who met monthly in the community room of a local library. The group consisted of 12 people: a postal worker, a nurse, a bus driver, a hairdresser, a construction worker, a grocery store clerk, a teacher, a mechanic, and several retirees. They ranged in age from 35 to 78 years old. Marcus felt out of place when he entered the room. Everyone looked at him with curiosity and some suspicion. They knew who Marcus Wellington was. His face had been on magazine covers and financial news programs. He represented the kind of wealth and power that most of them would never experience. But Rose vouched for him, and they welcomed him cautiously. The meeting began with each person sharing one investment they had made that month and explaining their reasoning. Marcus listened in amazement as these ordinary workers demonstrated investment knowledge that rivaled his expensive analysts. The postal worker talked about a Brazilian logistics company he had researched. The nurse discussed a pharmaceutical company in Israel that was developing affordable cancer treatments. The bus driver explained why he had bought stock in a company that manufactured electric vehicle charging stations. Their analysis was thorough and practical. They shared research with each other, debated the merits of different investments, and challenged each other's assumptions. Nobody tried to show off or pretend to know more than they did. When someone made a mistake, the group discussed it openly so everyone could learn. There was no shame in admitting ignorance or asking basic questions. Marcus raised his hand hesitantly and asked if he could share his recent investment decisions. The group agreed, though some members crossed their arms skeptically. Marcus explained that he had sold his positions in several high-flying tech stocks and had started investing in more stable, profitable companies. He mentioned buying stock in a water infrastructure company and a healthcare services provider. The construction worker nodded approvingly. Those were solid choices, he said. People always needed clean water and healthcare. But the teacher pushed back gently. She asked Marcus if he had researched how those companies treated their workers. Did they pay fair wages? Did they provide good benefits? Marcus admitted he had not looked into those details. The teacher suggested he should. A company that exploited its workers was not sustainable in the long term, she explained. Marcus felt embarrassed but grateful for the honest feedback. This was completely different from his boardroom meetings, where people were afraid to challenge him. Here nobody cared about his billions. They cared only about sound investing principles and ethical business practices. It was refreshing and intimidating at the same time. After the meeting, several members approached Marcus with questions about his businesses. The mechanic asked about the warehouse workers in Marcus's logistics company. Were they being paid fairly? Did they have reasonable work schedules? Marcus promised to look into it, realizing he had been so focused on profit margins that he had ignored the human cost of his business operations. The nurse asked if Marcus had ever considered using his wealth to invest in businesses that served low-income communities. She mentioned food deserts in poor neighborhoods, lack of affordable health care, inadequate public transportation. These were problems that needed solving, and they also represented investment opportunities. Marcus had never thought about investing to solve social problems. His investments had always been about maximizing returns. Rose watched these interactions with satisfaction. She had hoped the investment club would challenge Marcus's assumptions, and they had done exactly that. On the drive back to Manhattan, Marcus was quiet, processing everything he had experienced. Finally, he asked Rose why she had brought him to the meeting. Rose explained that she wanted Marcus to understand that intelligence and wisdom were not limited to wealthy, educated people. Some of the smartest investors she knew were ordinary workers who had educated themselves and thought deeply about where to put their limited resources. Marcus spent the following week reviewing his business empire with new eyes. He was shocked by what he discovered. One of his warehouse facilities had workers doing 10-hour shifts with minimal breaks. Another company he owned was notorious for firing employees just before they qualified for full benefits. A tech startup in his portfolio had created an app that charged predatory interest rates to desperate people who needed quick loans. These discoveries troubled Marcus deeply. He had always told himself that business was business, separate from morality. But Rose and her investment club had shown him that good business and good ethics were not mutually exclusive. In fact, companies that treated people well often performed better in the long term because they had loyal employees, satisfied customers, and good reputations. Marcus called emergency meetings with the executives running his various companies.
He demanded changes.
The warehouse workers got better schedules, higher pay, and improved conditions. The company that had been denying benefits to workers was restructured to treat employees more fairly. The predatory lending app was shut down completely, despite protests from investors who were making money from it. Some of Marcus's business partners were furious. They accused him of going soft, of letting emotions cloud his business judgment. Several investors pulled their money from his funds, believing Marcus had lost his competitive edge. The financial media speculated about what had happened to Marcus Wellington. Some articles suggested he was having a midlife crisis. Marcus did not care what others thought. For the first time in his life, he was making business decisions based on principles rather than just profit. It felt uncomfortable and uncertain, but it also felt right. He was sleeping better at night. The stress and anxiety that had plagued him for years began to ease. He realized he had been carrying the weight of ethical compromises that he had never acknowledged. Rose noticed the changes in Marcus during their Saturday meetings. He seemed lighter, less burdened. His questions became more thoughtful. He talked less about making money and more about making a difference. Rose told him she was proud of the progress he had made, but she warned him that the real test was yet to come. Marcus asked what she meant. Rose explained that it was easy to make ethical decisions when they did not cost much. But what would Marcus do when he faced a choice between doing the right thing and making a substantial profit? Would his principles hold when the stakes were high? That test came sooner than Marcus expected. A major real estate development opportunity emerged in a low-income neighborhood in Brooklyn. The project would involve buying old apartment buildings, evicting the current tenants, demolishing the structures, and building luxury condos. The profit potential was enormous. Marcus's real estate team was excited about the deal and urged him to move quickly before other developers noticed the opportunity. Marcus visited the neighborhood to see it for himself. He walked the streets observing the people who lived there. He saw children playing in small parks, elderly people sitting on stoops, families coming and going from the buildings that would be demolished. These were the same kinds of people he had met at the food bank. These were people like Rose, hardworking individuals trying to build decent lives with limited resources. Marcus thought about what Rose would ask him. Who would benefit from this development? Wealthy people who could afford luxury condos. Who would be harmed? The families who would lose their affordable homes and be forced to move far from their jobs, schools, and communities. The math was simple. This project would make Marcus richer, while making poor people's lives harder. Marcus called his real estate team and told them to cancel the project. His team was stunned. They could not understand why Marcus would walk away from such a profitable opportunity. Marcus explained that some opportunities were not worth pursuing, regardless of profit. He told them to look for development projects that would provide affordable housing instead of luxury condos. His team looked at him as if he had lost his mind. When Marcus told Rose about his decision, she smiled with genuine warmth. She told him he had passed an important test. True character was revealed not in easy choices but in difficult ones. Marcus had chosen people over profit, and that showed he was learning what really mattered. Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction that was deeper than any feeling he had experienced from making money. But the consequences of his decision were significant. More investors pulled their money from Marcus's funds. Several business partners ended their relationships with him. The financial media ran stories about Marcus Wellington's fall from grace, suggesting he had lost his business instinct. His net worth dropped by several $100 million as deals fell through and partnerships dissolved. Marcus met with Rose on a Saturday morning and admitted he was scared. He had spent his entire adult life building wealth and reputation. Now both were crumbling because he had decided to operate with more integrity. He asked Rose if he had made a mistake. Was he being naive to think that business could be ethical and still profitable? Rose listened patiently, then told Marcus a story from her own life. 20 years ago, she had been offered a job managing a cleaning crew for a company that contracted with ICE detention centers. The pay was double what she was making, and she desperately needed money for her children's education. But the job would have meant supporting a system that separated families and detained immigrants in harsh conditions. Rose had turned down the job even though it meant continued financial struggle. She told Marcus that she never regretted that decision. Some money was not worth earning. Some compromises damaged the soul in ways that could not be repaired. Rose had chosen to remain poor but keep her integrity intact. She had found other ways to educate her children and build her investments. The path had been harder, but she could look at herself in the mirror every morning without shame. Marcus realized that Rose was right. He still had more money than he could ever spend. Losing a few $100 million did not change his life in any meaningful way. But compromising his values would have changed who he was as a person. He thanked Rose for her wisdom and guidance. She had taught him that true wealth was not measured in dollars but in living according to principles that honored human dignity. As they left the diner that morning, Marcus felt a sense of peace he had not known in decades. He had lost money and business relationships, but he had gained something far more valuable.
He had gained a moral compass and a sense of purpose beyond mere accumulation of wealth.
The billionaire was finally learning what the janitor had known all along: that how you make money matters as much as how much money you make. 6 months after Marcus Wellington first saw Rose Martinez's investment portfolio, his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. He was still a billionaire, but he was no longer the same person who had mocked a janitor for listening to financial news. The transformation was evident to everyone who knew him. Marcus restructured his entire business empire around principles of ethical investing and sustainable growth. He created a new investment fund that focused exclusively on companies that paid fair wages, treated workers well, and contributed positively to their communities. Many traditional investors dismissed the fund as naive and unprofitable. They predicted it would fail within a year. But something unexpected happened. The ethical investment fund began to attract a different kind of investor. People who cared about more than just maximum returns started paying attention to what Marcus was doing. Universities with large endowments wanted to invest their money in ways that aligned with their values. Religious organizations appreciated the ethical framework. Young professionals who had grown disillusioned with traditional finance saw Marcus's fund as something different and meaningful. The fund grew steadily, not through aggressive marketing but through word of mouth. Marcus personally researched every company before adding it to the portfolio, using the methods Rose had taught him. He read annual reports cover to cover. He researched supply chains and labor practices. He visited factories and talked to workers. He looked for businesses that created genuine value rather than just clever financial engineering. Rose continued to work as a janitor at Wellington Tower. Marcus had offered her a job as a consultant with a 6-figure salary, but she had declined. She liked her work and did not want to change her routine at 60 FR.